Hi, my name is Robert Greene, and I'm the author of 6 books, including The 48 Laws of Power and The Art of Seduction, and you're watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Brand. Robert, thank you so much for your hospitality, having us into your home. So what did you do between sort of the 20s and that age 39, where you're a middle-aged man with your very first real marker of success, at least according to the world?
Well, I had a lot of fun. So after I graduated college, I went and lived in Europe for several years. I traveled around with a backpack, and then I got jobs. I lived there for like several years. I ended up living in Europe for about 4 or 5 years, combined with several trips over there. I worked in a hotel in Paris. I was a receptionist. I did construction work in Greece. I taught English in Barcelona. I worked in a television company in London. I was a tour guide in Dublin, Ireland. I had a blast, and I was trying to write novels. And then I went back to New York. I never lived in New York before, thinking I would get into journalism because I had to make a living, right? I couldn't just write poetry and novels and such. So I got into journalism, and I got a job at Esquire. So that was legitimate. My parents, they could be proud of that. And I got that job through my writing skills. I sent them a short story. And I was in journalism for many years. Wasn't a good fit.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of sounds very Hemingway-esque, traveling Europe and living in Paris and also the editorial. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's sort of
Well, not quite as sexy as Hemingway because I wasn't working for very interesting magazines. Esquire was, but afterwards it kind of declined. Essentially, the lesson is it wasn't a good fit for me, and I could have blamed. One time, an editor took me to lunch, something I'll never forget. I've talked about it before, and he was going to talk about an article I had written, and basically he had had his third vodka gimlet or whatever he drank, and he said, "Robert, you're not going to make it as a writer. You don't have the talent. You're too undisciplined. Your writing is too all over the place. You don't know how to communicate. Go to law school, go to business school. I'm telling you, I'm going to save you a lot of pain." And, instead of getting all upset and angry, I was initially, I don't deny it, it kind of sunk in that maybe because I wasn't excited about this career, it was showing up in my work. It was maybe my fault. So then I went back to Europe and I tried writing more novels and wandering around. I came back to LA to do my Hollywood career, and I tried screenwriting. I worked for a famous film director. I was his assistant. Had some very interesting adventures. I learned a lot about writing and making things dramatic, etc. I learned a lot about power and the power game through the master manipulators in Hollywood that I observed. And then, that's when we come to 1995, and I'm this depressed 36-year-old living in my apartment in Santa Monica.
There's so much there to unpack. I mean, if I could just maybe highlight some of the lessons that I'm hearing. One, it seems like you had tremendous self-awareness. You were at least self-reflective enough to take the criticism and sort of take inventory and decide whether or not that was accurate. I think that was probably another very pivotal moment in your life, it sounds like, where you could have, sort of the rubber hits the road, or you have this come to God moment where you're just like, what am I going to do? And maybe the lesson for people who are watching who don't have the life experience that Robert has is sometimes you do have to get brutally honest with yourself, and you have to listen to the critics, at least the ones that, what's that journalistic saying, consider the source. If the source is somewhat reputable, it's probably worth considering, and then you take an inventory. Now, that said, there's been a lot of people who've gone on to greatness who were told very early on that they would amount to absolutely nothing. Right. I remember this, I think Einstein was 3 or 4 years old before he could even talk, and they thought he had mental challenges. Or Walt Disney, I can remember, was told not creative in the least. Martin Luther King Jr., I mean, the list goes on of everyone who was told to sit down and shut up, and they'd amount to nothing, and then they went on to greatness. In my experience, I think if we're going to call that adversity or an obstacle or a setback or a punch in the face, I think we have 2 choices. You can get knocked down and stay down and kind of crawl away and go away, or you can stand back up, and come back and fight another day. It sounds like that's what you did. You had this awareness, you came back. The other thing I want to point out is this idea that it's not original to me, but I continue to hear it in themes as I talk to people with great minds like you, is that nothing goes to waste. So I can remember, my very first job, actually, I have to confess right now that I lied about my age. You had to be 16 to work at the Lamppost Pizza, but I was 15.
You sure you want that information to be out there?
I think it's safe now. It's past the
Okay.
What do they call it?
I don't want to read about this in the newspaper, but okay.
Apologies to
All right.
everyone who would be ashamed of me for lying. But I had a goal in mind. I wanted to buy my first car, which was a '69 VW Beetle. It was $1,500. I wanted to get my license on my birthday when I turned 16, so I lied, and I worked for a year while I was 15 at the pizza place. I washed dishes most of the time, and then worked my way up to making the pizzas. Eventually, I was even serving the people. Anyway, I was running the place by the time I was 16. I look back on that now, and the experience I had dealing with people and listening to my coworkers or trying, all of that stuff, I'm now somewhat using, even now, that experience is so useful. And so I think about nothing goes to waste. You say you were struggling and maybe drinking too much, and yeah, probably it was a hard time. But at the same time, you were traveling, you were in Paris and you were in Greece and you're getting all this life experience, like Hemingway, who put himself in the battlefield, right, even though he wasn't in the war. And that's what probably helped you get to this point of, where luck meets opportunity, right? And you sort of are ready and prepared when the knock comes.
Yeah, very well put. I mean, I think the key is that I knew deep down inside of myself that I was a good writer, that I was worth having some kind of success in life.
Yeah.
I didn't get down on that part. I doubted, whether I could be a screenwriter or a novelist, etc. But I knew deep down that it was the only thing that I'm good at.
Yeah. Well, you were dialing the frequencies, right? Just trying to find the right station.
Yeah.
You were in the ballpark, right? You're on the radio dial. Just had to dial the right frequency.
Yeah. And so when I look back on it, maybe it's a skewed perspective, but it seemed almost like fate that I had to go through all of these kind of lost moments. But they were teaching me. They had a reason behind them. I was almost being directed in this way. And so, my girlfriend and I, we once counted that I had like at least 60 different jobs. I've seen every kind of power maneuver. I have had the worst bosses in the history of mankind, I can tell you, right? I had all kinds of experiences, and I had learned in journalism how to write snappy, how to write well under a deadline. It all came together when I had to write the 48 Laws of Power. All those awful bosses that tortured me, I could put them in the 48 Laws of Power, completely disguised by kings and princes, etc. Right. So it was like the perfect, as you say, nothing was wasted.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from.